Hi there, my name's Kevin. I'm a developer advocate at Vonage, and in this video we will be covering the fundamentals of the JavaScript programming language. We'll be covering things like variables, data types like strings, numbers, arrays, objects and booleans, and some concepts like control flow using if statements and using loops to iterate over items in a list. Finally, we'll be looking at functions and a few real-world examples. You can choose to use this video and kind of play along and code along with me, or you can use it as a reference point and kind of come back to it as and when you need and just watch the content. I hope you find it useful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on the Vonage Developer Community Slack, which you can get to at developer.nexmo.com/slack. JavaScript is a programming language that runs in the browser and also on servers where it uses Node.js to run. We write instructions, called statements, to be run or executed by the computer. JavaScript statements comprise of values, operators, expressions, keywords, and comments. Keywords identify which type of statement we're writing, and values can be one of a number of types. So in this session, I'm going to introduce you to key JavaScript keywords and data types. Firstly, we need to quickly cover what HTML is. This is a very basic HTML document, and it contains the structure and content of a web page. It can also link to other assets, such as images, style sheets, and JavaScript documents. For example, in this basic page here, we have this title element in the head, and that dictates the name of the tab up here. Now I'm going to show you how to write some JavaScript for this HTML page so it will run in the browser. There are two main ways of doing this. The first is writing a script tag like so. And inside of these script tags, you can write some JavaScript. Console.log hello world and a semicolon at the end. This is a line of JavaScript that will print hello world to the console. But how do we get to the console in our browser? In pretty much every browser, you can right click and pick inspect or inspect element, and there'll be this console option. And we can see right there, hello world has been printed. There is another way of including JavaScript in your page. If you create a new file, you can call it anything you want, but it must end in .js, script.js. We can write this JavaScript in that file, and then instead of writing something in between the script tags, we can add an attribute, src, and reference the name of the file like so. So this is equivalent, except now our JavaScript is over in its own file, and this will be how we use it during this session. In JavaScript, variables are used to store data against a keyword. Instead of referring to the value, you can refer to the keyword. And you can also change the value of a variable, but the keyword stays the same. In order to create a new variable in JavaScript, we use the keyword const space, and then we provide the name. So for example, name, and then an equals, and then on the right of the equals sign, also known as an assignment operator, we can put the value that we want to be held in this variable, for example, Kevin. So now this variable exists, we can go ahead and console log it. And we can see that has printed here. We can also reassign the value of variables, but not if we create them using the keyword const. Const are for variables whose value cannot and will not change. Instead, we can use the keyword let, and now we can reassign the value of this variable like so. Let's console.log that again. And we can see at this point in time, name is equal to Kevin. Then we reassign it. So we don't write the word let. That's only when we're creating a new variable. And then we log it again, and the value has updated. Just so you're aware, there's also another way to define a variable in JavaScript using the keyword var. This works a lot like let, but there are some differences. Now in modern JavaScript, we don't really use var, we use const and let. But I just want to let you know that if you're seeing the word var in code snippets, it refers to creating a variable. Next, we're going to talk about the different basic data types in JavaScript. Firstly is one that you have already seen. It is a string. So this is a string used generally for text or other values that don't fit into another data type. You'll notice that there's a quote on either side of the string. You can use single quotes, you can use double quotes, and you can also use backticks. All that matters is that you use the same quote type on both sides of the string. We can also add strings together to create new strings. So if I create a variable, but I'm going to call this one first name, and then I create another variable called last name, I can create a third variable called full name, and this can be equal to the value of first name and last name together, and then I will console log the full name. And you see that's printed, but without a space, because there is no space in either Kevin or Lewis. So you could add in another space here, and now that has printed correctly. Next are numbers. Numbers act pretty much as you would expect. We can create a variable and call it pets, the number of pets I own, and the value is 1. Notice there is no quotes around this because this is a number. I can console log pets like so. I can also do arithmetic on this. So I could, if I make this reassignable, I can reassign pets to 2. Or a partial number, though I wouldn't recommend doing this to your pets. You can also do basic arithmetic operations. So I can say pets is equal to 1 plus 1, now meaning 2. There's also subtraction, division, and multiplication. And because variables can be used in place of their numbers, we can actually do this, and pets is equal to 1. So we are incrementing the value of pets. So whatever pets is currently equal to, add 1 to it, and now that is the new value of pets, so this will be equal to 2. Next, we're going to talk about Booleans. This one's going to be really quick. Booleans have either a value of true or false in JavaScript, all lowercase and without quotes. For example, const on the list. The value will either be false or the value will be true. We'll talk more about true and false values in a little bit. In JavaScript, arrays are used to create and maintain lists of values. In order to create a new array, I'm going to call this one fruits, we use square brackets. Every value will be comma separated. So, for example, apple, comma, orange, comma, and banana. This is an array. Now, in order to access values, single values in the array, so if I console log, we use the name of the array, and then we use square brackets, and we put in a number to denote the position of the item that we want. But here's the important thing. The first value is 0. So 0 is the first. That is known as zero indexing, and while it might feel a bit weird to start, it will be something you get used to. Pretty much every programming language 0 indexes. So this will be 0, 1 will be orange, and 2 will be banana. Next, we're going to cover objects. And objects are ways of grouping properties together. Let me show you, and then we can talk about it. I'm going to create a new variable called pet. And I'm going to use these squiggly brackets here to denote that this is an object. Now I can provide property value pairs, sometimes called key value pairs, to provide values to this object. For example, his name is Moo. You'll notice here there is a colon. This is not in quotes. This is in quotes, comma separated. So his name is Moo. His age is 3.5, and the value in the lovable property will be true. If I wanted to, I could also put arrays directly in here. So instead of name, I could put names, and I give him a few names. Moo, Bean, Little. No, you know what? I'm not going to put that into this. Now that we've got our object, let's see what happens when we print it to the console. We get this full object with this nice formatting here and also in the array. Now if I want to get single values, essentially I can put the name of the object, dot, and then a value. So pet.age is equal to 3.5. Pet.names is equal to an array. So pet.names square bracket 0 is the first item in the array. One other interesting thing about objects is you can nest them. So I can put as a property another object with a key and a value. So now if I wanted to get this value here, I would go pet.property.key and that would be equal to value. I've chosen property and key because I'm not very imaginative, but you can call these whatever you want. Let's also talk about how we can assign new values to this variable. If we want, we can create a new value. For example, I'm going to create a new one called eyes, and the value of that will be brown. Now if I console log pet.eyes, the value is brown, and that has made its way into the full object like so. Finally, I want to talk to you about a couple of data types known as specials. I'm just telling you this so when you see them, you kind of have an idea of what they mean. The first one we're going to talk about is called undefined. This is a data type that is generally used when a variable or property exists, but it doesn't yet have a value associated with it. Another special is known as null. And null means explicitly there is no value here. It's set, and the answer is there is nothing here. Don't get too bogged down in this, but just know if and when you see undefined and null that these are data types and they do not mean the same thing. Next, we're going to talk about comparisons in JavaScript. Now, comparisons will always result in either a true or a false value. So let me create a new variable, and I will call this one pets again, and I will just say 1. Now, a conditional has more than one pet. You can call it whatever you want. And the value of this will be, is pets greater than 1? Now, if I console has more than one pet, you'll see the value is false because this comparison is not true. It has resulted with a false. So you can use greater than or less than signs in order to do some basic comparisons in JavaScript. There is another type of comparison though. We can check if values are equivalent. Now, in order to do equivalency checks, we use two equal signs. So if I now say const has one pet, and the value in this is going to be pets equals 1, now the value of this has one pet will be true. So just remember we use 1 equals when we're assigning and 2 or sometimes 3 equals sign when we are comparing. This isn't just good for numbers, it's also good for strings. So if I say, you know, there's a keyword here and the keyword is stop, I can check if keyword is equal to stop. And that is true. Whereas if this was say one more character, the value would be false because these are not equivalent. Now, the reason comparisons are important is because they lay the foundation for control flow in our application. Now, we may not always want code to run in every context, and in order to make this work, we can use what are known as if statements. If statements look like this. Inside of these brackets needs to be a comparison, and code in these brackets will only run if that comparison results true. So if I say has one pet, then we'll console log welcome to the club, because I also only have one pet. And we'll see welcome to the club. But now if pets is equal to 2, that doesn't print because this is no longer true. You don't need to store it in a variable. You can put the comparison if you want directly in here, and that will work just the same. Sometimes you'll want to run code when this condition is specifically not true, and in order to do that, we can use an else statement. And we can see now this runs because this condition results in a false value. Next, we're going to talk about loops. Now, when we have a collection of items in an array, sometimes we might want to do some work on every item of that array. And it's not really feasible to manually do this for every item, especially if you don't know how long the array is. This is where loops come in handy. There are lots of ways to write loops, but they all start with the keyword for, then some brackets, and then squiggly brackets like this, and the code in here will run for every item in an array. So let me create an array again. I'll call this one fruits, and we'll do the same: apple, orange, and banana. And as I said, there are multiple ways of doing for loops. The way I'm going to do it is using what is known as a for of loop, like so. And now the value of fruit will be equal to this first item the first time it runs. It will be equal to the second value the second time it runs, and the third value the third time it runs. So if I just console.log fruit, you'll see it prints 3 distinct times for each item in the array. As I say, there are multiple ways to do for loops. Just look out for that word for, and if you don't recognize the structure of it, you could just take all of this, pop it into Google, and hopefully you will find out a little more around that variation of a for loop. Finally, we're going to do a whirlwind tour of functions. You can think of functions as reusable chunks of code that you can write once and then use multiple times. To create a new function, we use the keyword function. We provide a name. I'm going to call this one say hello. These rounded brackets, I'll come back to those in a moment, and these squiggly brackets. Code in between the squiggly brackets will run when this function is called. So I'm going to just console.log hello. If I save now, nothing happens because I've created the function but haven't used it. So let's use it, and now we see it prints hello. Now let's go and talk about these rounded brackets. And this is where we can provide what are sometimes called options, parameters, or arguments. They all mean the same thing in this context, and they make our function a little more flexible. Now I'm going to create a parameter called name, and now I can use name inside of this function. So we're going to say hello name. But where does name come from? We can provide it inside of these rounded brackets when we call the function. So here we are going to write the word Kevin. Now it says hello Kevin. I could call it again. I could say hello Massini, and now it says hello Massini. So we have a slightly more flexible function as a result. We can also provide multiple arguments. So I'm going to create a new function. It's going to be very boring. I'm just going to call it multiply. And it's going to take 2 arguments, A and B. You can call them whatever you want, but remember what you call them here is what they'll be referred to inside of the function. And I'm going to console log A times B. Now, if I run multiply, and we'll say 2 and 10, you'll notice comma separated and comma separated here. This is A, this is B. The value is 20, like so. Finally, we're going to talk about how we can use functions to create new values. Instead of just console logging A times B, we are going to return A times B. And now we can create a new variable. I'll call this one result. And the value of result will be equal to whatever is returned from this function. So this is equivalent to 2 times 10, which will be 20. So result, we can now console log result, is now equal to 20. So that's how this return statement is used. We could return anything. We could return hello, hello, and now it's returning hello. So hello is now inside of result, and now it's back to 20. Just to consolidate and combine some of our learning, you can also use functions as values in objects. And in this context, they are sometimes called methods. So you could put in I'll just call this one object. So you could put in a property, and the value of that will be a function without a name, because its name is property, and we'll console.log sup. Now, if we run object.property, we see it says sup. So this is known as a method. I want to give you some real-world examples of some basic things you can do with JavaScript. So I've updated our HTML document to have an H1 with hi there in it, and a button that says click me. Now over here in the JavaScript, I am getting the h1 and I'm storing it in a variable called h1. I'm doing the same with the button. And I'm listening for events. Events are things that users might do in your web page. So I'm listening to an event called click on button. So when the button is clicked, I will run a function. I will update the contents of h1 and then I will hide the button. We can see when I do that, we change the value of h1 and we hide the button like so. In this example, we're doing something a little more complex. We're using what is known as local storage, which stores data in the browser storage, even if the user refreshes the page. So what we're doing is when the page is loaded, we're getting an item, which we have just called value, and then we will pop up a box. We do that using alert with the value. There's an input, this input box here, there's a button, and whenever the button is pressed, we will update the item in local storage with the value of the input. So if I put my name in here, hit click me, and then refresh the page, we see that value has persisted even though we have refreshed the page. And then finally, in this example, we're using what is known as JavaScript fetch in order to go off to an API. In this case, it's a Pokemon themed API, get some data and then log it. And you can see here, it's just an object. So we could now go data.abilities and we'll only get back the items in that sub array. So this array is a property in the object. So here we are, and if we want to just get the first one, we can use 0, and now we just have the first ability that was returned from the API. Hopefully that provides some good context in how we write some JavaScript. Now we covered quite a lot during this. We covered what JavaScript actually is, how we run it in the browser, variables, types, conditionals, loops, and functions, and finally capping it off with a few real-world examples. Hopefully you found it useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me